BBC One, North West Tonight with Martin Henfield.
During the Amateur Dramatic Society murder trial, here's how Jenny Cubitt watched her victim, Kathy Lineker, bleed to death. Today, Kathy Lineker's husband described how he was frightened to leave his mistress because she was emotionally unstable. Most burglaries, most violent crime outside London, and the worst detection rate of the Metropolitan Forces is GMP giving value for money. And the real-life sadness behind a £250,000 success story. Good evening and welcome to North West Tonight. A jury heard today how a woman stabbed her lover's wife, then watched as she bled to death. Jenny Cubitt, who belonged to the same amateur operatic society as her victim, then waited 2 hours before raising the alarm. Cubitt denies murder but admits manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. This report from Peter Marshall.
Christopher Lineker arrived to give evidence as the murder trial moved into its third day. Jenny Cubitt, who's 24, is accused of killing his wife in a jealous rage after he said he'd never leave his family for her. Kathy Lineker, a deputy head teacher at a school in Haydock, was beaten and stabbed to death at the family home in Tannery Lane in Warrington in April last year. The house has since been sold. The jury's heard claims that after carrying out the attack, Jenny Cubitt waited for more than 2 hours before calling emergency services, initially telling police Mrs. Lineker had been attacked by a man who'd broken into the house. The prosecution says in the weeks leading up to the killing, Jenny Cubitt had become increasingly angry that Christopher Lineker would not run away with her. Christopher Lineker told the court that although his wife didn't know of his affair, she viewed Jenny Cubitt as a threat to their relationship. Jenny Cubitt, he said, was jealous of his wife. He went on to say that she was insecure and emotionally unstable. He said he would have been relieved if the affair had ended. He told the court he was frightened to end the affair, fearing his lover would either tell his wife or harm herself. Counsel for the defence said that was untrue. He wanted the affair, which centred on sex, to continue, and there had never been any threats made by Jenny Cubitt. Mr. Lineker said he'd made it clear from the start he'd never leave his wife, whom he insisted he loved despite having the affair. The trial continues. Peter Marshall, North West Tonight, Chester Crown Court.
Greater Manchester Police Force was today in the dock and facing charges. According to figures released today by the Audit Commission, Greater Manchester was the worst metropolitan force in the country for burglary, the second worst for violent crime, and its detection rate was nothing to shout about either. Better news, though, in Merseyside. Our Home Affairs correspondent Michelle Clifford has the details.
This fly-on-the-wall documentary has created huge controversy on Merseyside.
Now the city's unemployment rate is twice the national average. A life of crime has practically become a career option.
It paints a disturbing picture of crime and a police force struggling to cope. But today, an alternative production has left the police in Manchester with blues of their own. The force has emerged as one of the worst in the country for solving crime, despite being one of the most expensive to run. That's the conclusion of a report by the spending watchdog, the Audit Commission, which has compared the performance of all police forces in England and Wales. In this region, there were big discrepancies between the best and the worst. In terms of solving crimes across the board, the Cheshire and Cumbria forces fared best, both having a success rate of over 30%. Merseyside was the next best, solving a quarter of all crimes, closely followed by Lancashire and Derbyshire. Only 1/4 Greater Manchester Police solved fewer than 20% of all crimes. Cumbria and Cheshire were also best at solving violent crimes. Both had success rates of over 80%, followed by Derbyshire, Lancashire and Merseyside. Again, GMP was worst, solving just half of violent crimes. On to burglaries, with little change, with Cheshire and Cumbria topping the table. The Lancashire, Merseyside and Derbyshire forces lagged some way behind, but not so far as GMP. Of course, the critics will say a force like GMP, with its difficult urban area to police, can't be compared with the police in somewhere like Cumbria. So how does GMP fare beside forces with similar demands? Not well. Both Merseyside and the London Met Audit Commission says forces like GMP need to show they're providing value for money.
Manchester is one of the more expensive police forces in the country. It's also had an increase in expenditure over and above inflation. Now, what we'd like to see for all forces across the country who've been getting more money is the force explaining how this extra money is going to be used to benefit the public.
On the troubled Langworthy estate in Salford, which Home Secretary Jack Straw visited last year, there were mixed feelings today about police performance.
They respond very well to residents' groups and community groups. We've got a good working relationship with the council. At the moment, we've actually got 2 police officers above and beyond what we should have, and they're doing very specific work.
Well, actually, I would like to condemn the police, really. But I don't see many of them down here as they used to do.
What protection was getting stabbed? We all read a lot about it on the news, and it's terrible.
The Audit Commission said today that forces like GMP, which have fared badly in the report, should discuss their performance with the public. Michelle Clifford, North West Tonight.
Well, earlier I spoke to the head of operations for Greater Manchester Police, Detective Chief Superintendent David Brennan. I put it to him that GMP is giving the public poor value for money.
Well, I disagree with that. In common with all metropolitan forces, we do have a high crime rate, and our detection rate is correspondingly low. But having said that, we are improving. If you look at the figures for Greater Manchester year on year, then they've been improving for the last 4 years, and will continue to do so.
They have. I've got those figures. You've gone from 17 to 19.3. Commendable. But then the national average is 26, and you're still the worst of all the metropolitan area forces.
Yes, so if you look at the metropolitan area forces commitment to major incidents, for example, then Greater Manchester has a far higher commitment than the other forces, say, for example, West Yorkshire or Merseyside. In the year under consideration, 97-98, we had almost twice the number of murders than the other metropolitan forces, those other 2 metropolitan forces. On top of that, well into the financial year 97-98, we're still investigating the Manchester bombing. Now, if you put those sort of things in perspective, we do have a far higher commitment to major incidents, and it's difficult to strike the balance. But we continue to try and strike the balance between supplying detectives to major incidents, as tragically occurred last night in Old Trafford, and the balance to investigate burglaries and other crimes on the divisions.
Well, let's just talk burglaries. The highest rate in the country, almost double that of Merseyside, almost double that of the metropolitan area of London. That's shocking.
Well, it appears shocking, yes, but we are improving. If you look at the detection rates of burglaries, they've been improving for the last 4 years. And our policy is one of continued improvements, as I've stated before, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. But
why are they so expensive to run? £136 a head against £115 for the national average.
Well, I can't really comment on that. The budgetary implications are for somebody else to discuss, I would suggest. But you talk about value for money. If you look at the public satisfaction surveys contained in the Audit Commission report, the people that we deal with, the victims of crime, the public of Greater Manchester, who are the most important after all, are getting a very good service from
Well, they're not, are they? You're 15% down on response times to 999 call.
Well, there's an explanation for that as well. As you well know, we introduced within the last few years area operations room, and over the last few years there's a significant dip in our ability to meet target times for 999 calls. That over the last year. And remember, these figures are historical. We're talking about 9 months ago when the period ended.
Very briefly, what comfort can you give to the people of Greater Manchester?
We are continuing to try to improve. We can do better. We know that. But our officers on the front line are giving the public great satisfaction, as is evidenced in this particular report.
David Brennan, thank you very much indeed. And an interesting little footnote to that story. Merseyside's Chief Constable, Norman Bettison, must have been encouraged by his force performance last year, doing his best to make next year's figure look good as well. He leapt from his car to make an arrest himself yesterday. Ordering his car to pull over, he chased and caught a suspected thief who was being pursued by a security guard on the East Lancs Road in Norris Green. Now for news in brief, it's feared that an 18-year-old shot dead at a house in Greater Manchester may have been the victim of mistaken identity. Leon McKinley was shot at least 3 times in the chest when he answered the door of his home on Addison Crescent in Old Trafford last night. One theory is that he was killed by